What the is that? They're super giddy.
When I was around 5 years old, my grandparents bought an old mansion at the other side of town. Not to live there permanently, but his house needed some renovations, so they shifted to the old mansion. We were to stay in the mansion until the renovations were complete. First night in mansion went weird. As the days passed, I noticed that I used to have same dreams every night. In the dream, I would wake up and walk downstairs to the basement. When in the basement, I would walk through the room, and in there I end up seeing an older man who had a white coat on with red stains and a silly light flashing on his head. I noticed that he always stays in the room. In the middle of the room, there was a metal table with long metal pieces sticking out, which I learned later that it was stirrups. I never asked him about them because I was scared. It was very intimidating. He was always happy to see me though, and we always talked about whatever came to my toddler brain. Few days later, I told my mom about my dreams, and she called my grandmother, who came over to discuss it further. Obviously, I wasn't allowed to go in the basement, and I had never actually been down there. But surprisingly, I was able to describe it perfectly. I told them how to go to the room with the man in the white coat. I told them about the table with the weird metal objects sticking out, and the red stuff all over his white coat. They took my talk as a childish. One day my grandfather uncovered a bunch of old-school medical equipment from that basement room. He found that a doctor who owned and lived in the mansion, which used to be used as a perform abortions for young, unwed mothers, in his basement, in the exact room I mentioned. Back in the day, it was taboo for young women to become pregnant without being married, and this was all done very carefully as long as you had the money. It kept the young women safe from abandonment, and it also helped the doctors to earn a little extra money. Unfortunately, not all women survived. Many died at a young age. I still remember the dreams with the man, but learned about the reality of the situation when I was much older. My parents got divorced 1997. I was born 1990, so I was 7 at the time. They stayed friends, but my mom moved out to my grandparents' old house. My grandparents had quite a lot of money and had recently moved without selling the house, so there was no problem for them to let my mother and us to move into their old house. We ended up living there for about 5 years. It was me, my mother, and my 2 sisters, who both are a few years older than me, and our dog. Here, what I am going to tell you is not a chronological order since I can't remember when everything happened, but I assure you that everything I write is 100% true. The house had 3 floors. Ground floor, basement, and upper floor where me and my sisters slept. The basement was the most horrific place in the house. The stairs led from the basement up to the first floor, then to the second floor like a spiral, and most of the steps would creak and make lots of sound when stepping on them. Several times a week, you would hear footsteps slowly walking from the basement up the stair, taking a short break at the ground floor, then keep moving to the second floor. Most of the times, the steps would stop at my older sister's room, but it would vary, and sometimes stopping outside my room, or my middle sister's room. We all heard it. My mom did not like to talk about it, but my sisters and I often talked about it the day after and confirming hearing it outside whatever room it stopped by. We all hated going down to the basement. It was a big basement that you would think children would enjoy playing in, but we hated it. Our dog never went down to the basement. She hated it just as much as us. All kinds of minor things happened down in the basement. The light would turn off randomly, things moved, and you could often hear stuff moving down there even though no one was down there. One evening, me and my sisters were playing with walkie-talkies, trying to get to the local police channel, thing kids did during the 90s. This time, the voice in the walkie-talkie was different and sounded much closer. The voice said all kinds of things. It was speaking directly to my oldest sister and said that it was going to hurt her. It even spoke her name, but I don't think it ever answered our questions. We got scared and turned off the walkie-talkie. A minute or so later, our dog ran into our room and barked out into nothing. Our dog was large and protective of us kids, and kept staying in the room, barking, which has never happened before or after. Another time, me and my mom was home, but my sisters and dog was away. I was playing up in my room, and my mom was doing whatever moms do. Suddenly, I hear really loud footsteps from the basement, even though I was on the second floor in my room, walking, almost running up from the basement, then continuing up the stairs to the second floor. I remember my heart just stopped when listening to the footsteps. My mom never walks that heavy and angry. The footsteps continued until outside my room, then stopped, and my door was slammed really hard. The door closed and I screamed and cried. My mom raced up the stairs and tried to open the door, but she couldn't. It was as the door was locked, though. I don't think the door had a locking mechanism. My mom shouted to me to be calm while she ran down to get tools to tear the door down. While she was down, and 7-8-year-old me was crying, the door suddenly unlocked itself and opened. Another time, when my sisters and my dog was away, there was a storm, and for some reason I was deathly afraid of the thunder. I have never been afraid of thunder before or after, but this night I was, and in the basement everything went crazy. We heard things thrown around down there, glass shattering, which we confirmed in the morning after that glass and stuff had been thrown around and shattered. There were footsteps running up and down the stairs, and me and my mother hugged each other, both scared of what we were hearing. At one time, we were sitting in the living room, just being deathly scared. The entrance door flew open, then closed, opened and closed again for several minutes. It was a storm outside, and it was blowing. But this was not the storm. Many more minor things happened, but these are what came to my mind. It seemed to me that it got worse when my dog was not around, and it was more after my older sister. Even though I told you about the things happened to me, she had many more experiences. A couple of times, she claimed that she saw an old man watching her sleep. I have not talked to anyone about these experiences except my mom and sisters, so I think I just needed to write this off. We lived in the house around 1997-2002. If you have any questions about the house or the experiences, just ask. When I was still married to my military husband, he was overseas, and I moved our daughters and myself to our follow-on duty station. I rented a 100-plus-year-old house. It was wonderful, out in a rural area with a huge yard. The only problem was, it had mysterious happenings. One of the things that I soon learned happened on a regular basis was the knocker. The basement of the house was very dark and damp. My washer and dryer and deep freeze were in the basement, so I did have to go down in it quite often. I never allowed my 2 young children down in it due to the dark and dampness. The only entrance to the basement was a door located in the kitchen. It happened to be right next to the back door, which was also in the kitchen. Not long after we moved in, I heard knocking on the back door. Thinking it must be a neighbor, I went to answer it. As I approached the door, I realized it wasn't the back door. It was the basement door. I knew my children were in the living room and couldn't figure out who would be in my basement. I opened the door to noon. This occurred on a regular basis. At least once a week, I heard the knocker. The neighbors and owner of the home knew nothing about it. I also hung a photo of my husband and I up on the wall by the front door. Many, many mornings, I came in to find it either hanging upside down or laying on the floor beneath one of the chairs or sofa. I would replace the photo and leave it at that. My parents came to visit one weekend. We were sitting in the living room, and suddenly we hear knocking on the back door. I tried to ignore it, but my very practical mother insisted on answering the door. I followed her to the door, insisting she just ignore it. She thought I was terribly rude. Then she opened the door. Realizing there was noon there, she literally stalked back into the living room, picked up her purse, and as she was going out the door, said, "Mel, I'll be in the car." He drove her the 3 hours home, and she refused to ever come back. Another time, after my husband returned from overseas, we had guests and were sitting in the living room. Suddenly, the husband stopped talking and was staring at the wall next to the front door. He said, "Susan, get the baby. It's time to go home." We followed his stare to the front door and watched as the photo of my husband and myself was slowly turning upside down. There were other strange occurrences, and it soon became apparent that whatever it was, did not like my husband at all. If he upset me or the children in any way, things picked up and something bad happened to him. One day, following an argument, he left to drive to a local Kmart. He called me from the store. He was almost to the store when the left driver's side rear wheel came off the truck and he wrecked the truck. He apologized to me. He called the entity Hardy. It followed us to our next base and left only when we divorced.